What's up, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin, and today I want to show you how I care for my Eulophoria petersii. Now, the only common name I know this by is the Peters Eulophoria, but alas, it is the desert orchid. Now, I do know that there are several different kinds of desert orchids out there, or the terrestrial orchids as you've probably heard them, but they are grown in the soil. So you cannot use orchid bark or kind of wood chips with these guys. This is the Eulophoria petersii, and it is one of my favorite orchids out there. But it is a great plant to have. If you're kind of like me or how I used to be and you have trouble remembering to water your plants or to turn the humidifier on or to even mist or to feed or anything like that, this is probably a plant that's better for you, just because they are native to around the Arabian Peninsula and Eastern and Southern Africa. And they're a really weird, kind of unique orchid because they're found in more harsh, arid environments. Some more desert-like environments where it does get fairly hot and fairly dry. These guys typically get more rain in the kind of late spring and summertime, and then in the wintertime you can't water them at all. So typically from November on up to February to March, I don't water this guy at all. I let him sit there and stay dry and give him a little bit of light, and he's right as rain. He's pretty happy. Now, I want to show you these leaves. These leaves are what make this plant pretty unique, just because they are so thick and fleshy and rigid, and they are serrated on the edges. So if you put this in an area that receives a lot of high traffic, someone's gonna cut themselves, probably an arm or a leg, depending on where you stash it at. So I wouldn't put it in an area where a lot of people kind of frequently walk by, or a lot of pets, because you will end up cutting somebody and it will actually cause some damage, because these serrations aren't too bad, but the leaf is really thick, so it does have some give to it, but not too much. So if you get someone pretty good, it won't take much to actually make them bleed a little bit. So be very careful of where you place it. The next thing that makes these orchid fairly unique is these gorgeous pseudobulbs on here. Now I say gorgeous because of the kind of coloration with them, and they are kind of light greenish yellow, but they are kind of rigid and kind of ribbed, but they are thick, kind of fleshy pseudobulbs that will store water, and just like the leaves and the fleshy tuberous roots will do as well. So this plant is used to not getting a whole lot of water and actually being able to store a lot of water in its thick, really fleshy kind of tuberous roots and the pseudobulb, and a little bit in the leaves as well. Now if you notice that your pseudobulbs are more ribbed than usual, that probably is a good indication that your plant does need a little bit of water. Typically around the summer or the growing season for this plant, I water about once every 2 weeks. It's very important that the media actually dries out in between watering. So I will sometimes go about 2 weeks during the growing season before I give him water again. And like I said, it does need to dry out completely before you actually give it more water. It doesn't take much for this plant to succumb to root rot at all. Light is another important factor that I like to talk about with this guy. And you think, okay, well, a tropical kind of arid environment, they're probably going to get a good amount of sunlight, and that's true for the most part. But typically where they're found in their natural environment is kind of a rather shallow, kind of soil nutrient deficient area and a kind of a rocky outcrop. So they do have a little bit of kind of shade during the harder parts of the day, but you don't want them to get too much direct sunlight, especially around this area. Too much during the hotter part of the day can end up killing this plant, or at least burning the leaves back quite drastically and causing more problems with your desert orchid. So typically I keep mine in a south facing window, and I scoot him back just a little bit, and I do have blinds to kind of filter or dampen some of that harsh light out. And I haven't had to supplement much with any LEDs or anything of that nature, although in the wintertime I've noticed that a little bit of the the leaf tips are kind of drying out some. So I have kind of gone in every once in a while and just kind of make sure that I can give him a little bit extra light, just because it is wintertime, and in northern Kentucky we get more overcast, shady days than we get any bright sun during this time. So during the winter I do supplement a little bit with the growing lights, but during the spring and summer he's fine just to kind of sit back and get some kind of bright shade. You don't want it to be too harsh because it can cause problems with yours. After talking about the light and the water, you can talk a little bit about humidity. And again, in the wintertime, after about November, when I cut off the water for this guy, I don't give him any humidity either. I do have him kind of set back because in my grow room and my living room, I do have a humidifier going, but I do have him set back to where he's not getting too much humidity around this time as well. But come spring and summer, I will kind of put him back around the other humidity loving plants to actually get him a little bit more humidity, and he's happy there too. Now, I believe when I looked it up, it said that they do enjoy kind of higher levels of humidity somewhat. They don't need anywhere up to around 75%, but I think about 50 to 60, they kind of like that. But I do know that in the deserts, they typically don't get that humidity, but depending on where they are, they can get some. So a little bit of humidity is important, especially if you're kind of wanting to combat any pests. Now we know that mealybugs do like kind of bone dry, arid, non-humidified areas that don't get too much humidity, but I haven't seen a problem with any mealybugs on him. I haven't seen a problem with spider mites, but I know that they can struggle a little bit with spider mites and mealybugs. So if you do notice either of those, you can come in with a nice washcloth or a Q-tip and dab some isopropyl alcohol on there and go over and under every leaf strap and pseudobulb that you can, and any creases down in there from the pseudobulbs to where the leaves attach and down along the pseudobulbs as well. You can kind of come in with some rubbing alcohol and just kind of look for any filaments that may indicate any spider mites or any kind of white cottony looking creatures that may be mealybugs. Now, I know some other YouTube growers have done some videos on this plant, and a lot of people will tell you because of their thick, fleshy, tuberous roots, they do like to be grown in a long, cylindrical kind of pot, as opposed to like an azalea pot that gets wider, because their roots get really thick and fibrous and fleshy, and they tend to grow more down rather than out. So don't be like me and put yours in a plastic pot. Although I have pruned him back a little bit, and this was the original pot that he came in, and I pruned back too much. So I stuck him back in this same pot, but next time I want to go ahead and put him in a terracotta pot, just because they don't like too much water. So terracotta will actually help kind of wick most of that excess water away. And you always want to make sure that your pot has ample drainage holes in the bottom. I don't want to tip this over too much, but there are probably about 8 huge, decent sized, maybe nickel sized drainage holes in the bottom that let any excess water drain freely. Now I do keep a saucer under him, but I keep a close eye on him too. And if I notice that the saucer begins to fill up with water, I'll let it sit there for anywhere from about 15 to 20 minutes. After about 20 minutes, you can go ahead and drain the excess water. At that point, any of the roots that have come into contact with the water will go ahead and soak about as much water as they can hold, and after about 20 minutes, they're no longer able to hold any more water, and then you can actually dump the rest of that out. I think the only thing left I want to talk about is the soil. Like I said, you can take a good look at my soil in here. I have more of a bonsai type soil with this guy. You can notice there are a lot of rocks in here. Like I said, they are from a rocky kind of arid outcrop area where they don't have very nutrient rich soil. So they tend to like more bonsai soil with kind of stone and wood chips, a kind of succulent, porous, airy media that actually lets a lot more air in around the roots as well. And it won't hold on to too much water either. When it comes to the soil pH, you want to err on the side of caution and keep it more on the acidic side. These plants like it anywhere from moderately acidic, kind of 5.6 on up to 6.0, on up to slightly neutral. And when I say slightly neutral, I mean anything ranging from 6.6 on up to about 7.3. Like I said, they do prefer a little bit more on the acidic side, so if you can help that, that will help your plant better. Now, I really wish this plant was in bloom. Fortunately, this plant doesn't really bloom until about late spring on up to about midsummer, but they can have about 6 foot long racemes of inflorescences, and their flowers are anywhere from a kind of a dark brown to a darker red on up to a yellowish chartreuse color. But they have really unique looking kind of flowers that are fairly insignificant. There's a lot of flowers, but they are really kind of small flowers. But they are really pretty, and with their color scheme too. It does really look good with these kind of jade, thick, fleshy leaves on up to about their 2 meter length racemes with the inflorescence. Now, just like any other plant, whenever you have it, about every other month or so, we'll take him and kind of throw him in the tub and kind of hose him off with the disposable or detachable shower head. And that just kind of helps ensure that no other pests are kind of hanging on there and setting up shop and maybe giving this guy a run for their money. And just like we do, plants like to be given a bath every once in a while too. The excess water will knock off any other pests or drain out any of that excessive salt or fertilizer that you may use on this plant. Excessive fertilizer burn can cause a big problem with this guy too. They're not very fast growers. They do grow a little bit on the slower side, and I do mean really kind of slow side. So if you feed too often and you're feeding past maybe even August, then your plant's going to end up developing too much of salts and fertilizer in the soil. So if you give it a bath every other month and kind of flush some of that out, it'll be very beneficial to your plant as well. Now, occasionally you will have to do some light pruning. Like I said, these leaf tips do get a little bit dry. You can go ahead and cut those off and remove them. If you're interested in propagating a Eulophoria petersii, the best way to do that would be to go ahead and come in and split it. These plants do kind of clump together, so after you get a whole bunch of them together, you can come in after the plant has flowered, and you can come in and actually split it with a sharp spade or a good pair of pruning shears and actually have smaller plants too. Now, this plant actually hit the shelves in the early 1990s. And back then, when it first came out, it was pretty expensive. You were looking anywhere from about $45 on up to about $60 per pseudobulb. But now they are readily available and they're not as expensive, though a plant of this size can easily go for over $100 just because they are fairly slow growers. Well, guys, that's all I really wanted to say on this plant. As always, I wanted to give a special shout out to my Patreons. I wanted to give a special shout out to my top tier tree patrons like Thuyen. Thank you. I'd also like to give a shout out to my other patrons like David as well. If you have any plant questions or problems and want to get a hold of me, one of the best ways to do that would be on Patreon. I'm often bogged down by messages and comments and emails and things of that nature. And as always, whenever you donate on there, it enables me to keep the lights on and to take care of these plants and keep other videos coming. Well, guys, this has been Justin reminding you that if you can, go out and plant a tree. Let's reforest the world. And while you're at it, leave me a comment and let me know what some of your favorite orchid species are. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button or the bell next to it. That way you'll know anytime that I've uploaded a new video. You guys take it easy, have a good one, and don't forget, always plant prudently. Thank you, YouTube.